Well, guess this is the payoff we were building up to. Trial of the Time Lord concludes with the story now referred to as The Ultimate Foe. So this is the big reveal of Trial of a Time Lord, and has to do with the reveal of the valeyard and then the playing out of that story thread. Now, this was a twist I knew. I've known who the valeyard is. I've known who the valeyard is since I very first got into Doctor Who, because one of the first things I started doing as I was catching up on the modern era series that I hadn't seen yet before I started watching it as it aired with Series 4 was just looking up the Doctor on Wikipedia. And look, here's all the incarnations. Oh, with some variants like the valeyard. Like, I knew the valeyard was an distilled evil version or like kind of offshoot of the Doctor. It's actually done kind of vaguely because he gets identified as something that comes about between the Doctor's 12th and 13th regenerations, which means he's not actually a proper regeneration, but he's just a thing that happens. Yeah, it's a little it's a little odd. But in any case, the that whole reveal was not a surprise to me. I knew it was coming. And it's not a bad twist. Doesn't fully work though. There's actually a fair number of things about this that don't fully work. There's also a lot of small things across it that do work. There's actually some bits that are great, but it doesn't pull the whole thing together. And part of that has to do with the way it was structured up to this point, because despite the framing device of the trial, these individual stories didn't actually feel like they were building to something greater. This is just wrapping up that framing device story. And as far as that goes, I guess it gets the job done, all things considered. But if there's a main problem with the valeyard, it's something that is actually very, very common to twist villains in, well, honestly, most media, whether it be movies, TV, novels, whatever. One of the inherent problems with a twist villain is while it makes logical sense that when their villainy was not known to the protagonist and the audience, that they were behaving in a way to mask their villainous intentions. And then once they're found out, they don't have a reason to do that anymore, and they just, behave how they've wanted to this whole time. Logistically, that makes sense. However, the narrative fallout of that is you don't feel like you had a reveal of one character. It feels like you've just got two different characters because they tend to just behave completely differently once the twist happens. Once the reveal happens. The post-reveal villain is often effectively a different character altogether. Now, there are ways to thread that needle and make it work. Honestly, the best way to do it is to have the masked version actually be very true to who they are, just withholding their intentions and their goals, and to actually not have the personality change a lot. But most things don't do that. And this definitely doesn't. It honestly wouldn't be so much of a problem, except that a lot of what they have the valeyard doing is just sinister laughing and monologuing, which we've got a villain for that. That's the Master's shtick. And speaking of which, I didn't know that the Master showed up in this story. That part caught me by surprise. I did not realize the Anthony Ainley Master showed up in this. And it's a little bit of a stock thing, that whole I'll help my enemy because only I should ever be allowed to defeat him. So I'll help him, against this other foe that might take him out before I get the chance to. Like, it's a little bit of a stock, pompous villain thing, but I often kind of like it, and that works well enough here. Although, like, unfortunately, they do have moments later, like when he tries to hypnotize Sabalon Glitz, and it just doesn't work. And Glitz is like, ooh, that thing you're waving in front of my face is so shiny, I want it. I'm like, oh, right, I almost forgot. The Master was basically a joke by this point. And just for a point of comparison, the Roger Delgado Master hypnotized people not with a wave and a thing, just by looking at them. And he sold it. You believed that those eyes took over and overrode somebody's will. Whereas the Anthony Ainley Master is going to wave a thing and then it doesn't work. It really does show the gradual degradation of the Master over the years during the classic era. But anyways, I still don't mind that he showed up, and his initial appearance was like, it was a fun jolt. It was like, oh, hey, okay, that's a change of pace. There are also some, as I said, some really interesting and well done specific key moments. Like, first of all the credit to Colin Baker. His little speech, his rant, actually, about the decadence and the corruption of the Time Lords. Oh, that's good. He sells righteous fury really well. And I feel like, in a lot of ways, I feel like that speech is the version of the Doctor that Big Finish glommed onto. Now, it's not like they do that with him all the time in the audio adventures, but it feels like they understood, okay, that moment where, yes, he's brash and abrasive and a little hostile, but he's right and he is righteous in his intent. That's what makes this work. Whereas other times in other stories, he's just gotten on a pompous high horse and just kind of gone off. And it's like, dude, bring it down. Here, no, fully justified. He has every right to this rant. And boy, does it work. That's a real good moment. The stuff in the Matrix is, for what the concept of what the Matrix is, it's kind of low rent, unfortunately, for budgetary restrictions, I'm sure. But they still do some clever stuff with it, like the bureaucracy stuff and Mr. Popowick, who, they just go into this place and there's sort of this waiting area and this guy at this desk. Then they open the next door and it's that same guy at the desk. But it's not like the room looped around. It's like this entire building is staffed with that guy at a desk. Like, that's a nice dream logic kind of representation of bureaucracy. I dig that. I like that quite a bit. There's also like a really cool moment just in terms of the shooting when Mel first shows up and approaches the Doctor, where the use of shadow in that's real good. Like, they completely cover her face in shadow. It's just, there's some smartly done shooting, despite the clear budgetary restrictions and stock sets that they're kind of stuck with using to represent this. There are some conceptual problems with The Matrix, though. The big one being that this idea that this whole thing kind of hinges on that the Matrix is infallible, but it turns out it's not, is not really a thing that their audience is going to have a lot of investment in, because The Matrix has never come up before. So it's not something that the audience actually knows to depend on. The audience, to whatever extent we have an expectation that it's infallible, it's only because you told us so. And only in over the course of this overarching story. We don't have a lot of firm foundation for that. So when you then subvert that belief, especially after you've been questioning it, or the Doctor has been questioning it from earlier, then that's not a big surprise. It actually feels a little bit frustrating that the Time Lords are so stubbornly devoted to the idea that it can't be tampered with, when as audience we're going, why not? Now, like, in universe and character, yes, they are so pompous and high-minded that they would be arrogant enough to think, no, our thing is flawless. And because they're dumb like that. So it's not that I don't buy it. It just makes for not a particularly satisfying plot point to hinge so much of the overall story on. Oh, Peri. So this is weird. So they kind of do a weird retcon-y thing to undo Peri's apparent death. Now, I have very mixed feelings about what it seemed like happened to Peri in, it was 2 episodes back, in Mind Warp. It felt very sudden, and it didn't feel properly acknowledged. Like, it was acknowledged somewhat, but the full weight of that, especially given what happened to her, she didn't just die, she was erased. Her mind was erased. That didn't feel like it was given the proper weight and the proper closure as to just giving the audience a way to process and come to terms with that. It just kind of happens and then the story moves on. This is not really a solution, though, what they do in this, because they have like a vocal confirmation of like, oh, but she lives and now she's the queen and because she married Brian Blessed's character. And it's like, wait, hold on. Hold the heck on. Because first of all, did her mind get wiped out and replaced with that other guy whose name I can't remember or not? Because while like stuff got cut off and like was weird in the Matrix, that's a big thing to fake. That's not just like some information's missing, which was the general implication of the Matrix stuff up to this point. That was like, that's a full rewrite. That's a big addition of stuff that did not happen. So if it did happen, how did that get undone? And if it didn't happen, you probably should have dealt with that and made that a little bit clearer. But also, beyond that, anyone else really not get a romance vibe? Like, I get that he crushed on her. I got that. But am I out of my mind, or did she really not feel reciprocal to that? Like, she had an affection for him. I think she appreciated him. I think she could have hung out with him, married him? What? It's weird. Like, I understand that they were trying to fix something that probably they were getting a negative audience response to and trying to fix it quickly when they could not bring the actress back in to shoot new stuff. I get that their ability to quote unquote fix this was very limited. And I'm not even sure I have a better thing to offer up in its place, but doesn't really work like much at all. So that was weird. And the other really good moment for the Doctor that I like is when it's sort of like within the Matrix, and like I called the whole thing about how this isn't really happening, this is still within the Matrix, and then but the Doctor actually kind of knows that, and he's trying to be sneaky. Like every step of that I called. But there's a really good moment in that where the Doctor basically gives up defending himself and is prepared to answer for for the crimes he's being accused of. And where Mel is trying to defend his genocide of the Vervoids, and she says, "You didn't have a choice." And the Doctor just simply says, "There's always a choice." I love that. Not enough media really properly grapples with that idea. And even this is kind of a surface level acknowledgement, but it's more than I get in a lot of places, which is that, yeah, you do. You might rationalize in that moment that you don't have a choice. And especially in the moment, if you believe that accepting death is not an acceptable option, then anything that isn't that, you feel like you had no choice but to do it. But you did have a choice. You made a choice. And feeling like you had no other option, or even if you're willing to understand that maybe you had no better option, that doesn't absolve you of responsibility or consequences for the choice you made. I didn't have any other choice is never true. You made a choice, and maybe you still feel it was the right one or the only one that was reasonable for you to make. But that doesn't absolve you of the consequences of that choice. And that's what I feel like is communicated very simply and plainly in that moment with the Sixth Doctor. And I really like that. I like that a lot. There's also some bits of weirdness, especially towards the end. You can kind of feel the crunch down timeline of this story only having 2 episodes to work with, because there's this whole thing about the High Council getting deposed that I really didn't follow properly, like at all. I don't get what happened or why it's in the story. I don't know. I could look up exactly what was going on with that, but it was weird. It didn't make sense, and it didn't seem like it needed to be there at all. I guess it was part of the Valeyard's plan, or maybe it was part of the Master's plan. I can't even remember now. That was weird. There's this whole thing with like this explosion of the monitor in the courtroom, and the members of the court survive by duck and cover? Really? You don't even have to evacuate. You just put your head down. Whew. Thank goodness there wasn't any kind of force impact from that blast. Like, oh, all right. Whatever. So there's little weird, quirky bits like that don't quite land. There's the implication that, the valeyard is still, well, not implication. You flat out see him. The valeyard's still around. Which I guess means it makes more sense that a lot of fans have continued to clamor for the valeyard's return. I don't really see the point, especially having seen what the valeyard was like post-reveal, where he just behaved like the master and had effectively the same goal as the master had back when he was what I think of as the crispy master, the one who was all burnt up, which is just to steal the Doctor's remaining lives. He's recycling a plot from the old master. He's acting like the master. Like, we don't need this guy. This is unnecessary. Now, I'll grant that does mean, in theory, there's a lot more that you could do because he was from so long ago and is a relatively deepish cut, that you have a fair amount of wiggle room to bring about new characterization. And if a creator, be it RTD or anybody else, has a real solid idea of how to rework this character, I'm not going to say that's necessarily a bad idea. I don't get the general call to, bring back the valeyard. Bring him back. He wasn't that interesting. If you're going to say to me, bring back the valeyard and do something new with him, okay, maybe. But, as far as how he was as a villain, no, he's just the master again. And you want a far better version of this idea of the dark side of the Doctor? Look at the Dream Lord. The Dream Lord was so good. Toby Jones was so good in that part in the 11th Doctor story, Amy's Choice, because he was very much a direct reflection, not just of the Doctor in general, but of that Doctor specific. He wasn't a generic cackling villain. He was a twisted carnival mirror image of that specific Doctor. And boy, with way less screen time than the valeyard gets, and only one episode appearance, he sells the idea of being the dark parts of the Doctor so much better than anything involving the valeyard does. So if you're going to tell me we should bring back the valeyard, I'm going to counter with, bring back the Dream Lord first. And then, after that, we can talk about doing the valeyard, or whether we even need him. I would argue we don't. But, there have been better iterations of most of the ideas that are present here. But there are still solid moments. Solid bits of filmmaking, solid bits of performance, even solid bits of writing. The Doctor's rant is an absolute highlight and probably Six's greatest moment in the show proper. That wasn't done later in audio by Big Finish. It's not a complete fall on its face conclusion, but it is basically just serviceable. It's oh, okay. So that's how that wrapped up. It doesn't make you go, wait, what? And nor does it make you go, oh, it all built to this and it paid off. It's neither. It's middling. It's serviceable. Gets the job done. Was not enough to save this era, or unfortunately Colin Baker's run as the Doctor, despite the fact that he's significantly better in this than he was in his first series. But here we are nonetheless. It's there. It's the conclusion. Okay. The Ultimate Foe, the end of Tale of the Time Lord. Now, I am going to be planning to do a bigger video on the main channel talking about the Trial of a Time Lord overall, because the idea of these reviews has been to do the one part at a time. But now that I've seen the whole thing, I kind of want to talk about the entire thing as a complete package, which is going to be its own video, and I am planning to have that be on the main channel. So you can look forward to that in future. In the meantime, Patreon supports what I'm able to do. Have you rewatched this episode lately, by the way? If you have, I want to hear what your thoughts are. Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Even if you're working on faded memories, let me know those too. Like, share, subscribe also help. But don't worry too much about it, because we take a relaxed attitude around here. So you can just come on back next time you need a break. Massive thanks to my Patreon supporters, and in particular, I want to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, David Hall, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thanks for your support. You can get your name in the credits too if you feel like hearing me possibly struggle with it for several times before getting it right.